Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Thursday, February 12th, 2026. Now, I want you to take a second and actually mark that date. Not because it's a holiday, but because if this stack of research is right, we are standing on the precipice of history. This could be what historians look back on as the inflection point for the giant of Africa.
It is a significant date. And honestly, inflection point isn't just, corporate speak or hyperbole here.
Right.
We're unpacking a document called the Nigeria Strategic Assessment, which was just finalized. And the picture it paints is, well, it's a massive paradox. It's arguably the most confusing moment in Nigerian history.
Confusing is definitely the right word, because on one hand, I'm reading these numbers and seeing Nigeria is projected to be Africa's third largest economy this year.
Yep.
We are talking a GDP of what, $334 billion, finally surpassing Algeria again. On the surface, it sounds like the whole Africa Rising narrative is finally, getting a job and moving out of its parents' house.
It certainly looks that way from altitude, but then you zoom in, flip the page, and you see the other side of the ledger. You see these existential internal security threats that, they haven't gone away.
No.
You see a huge displacement crisis that's actually getting worse, and a geopolitical landscape that is, frankly, pretty hostile to Nigeria's ambitions. The assessment calls this moment navigating the inflection point. It's incredibly fragile.
So it's like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so here's our mission for this deep dive. We need to unpack this assessment to understand how Nigeria got past those really painful reforms of 2023 and 2024.
The ones that really hurt.
Yeah, the ones that hurt the average person, and what's happening now in this so-called economic thaw. And then we have to look at the three specific futures for 2031, because apparently the next 3 years decide everything.
They do. The window for action is defined as the next 36 months. So let's start with the present reality. Let's talk about the economy.
Right. Section 1, the economic thaw. The document uses that word thawing, which implies things were pretty miserable before. But looking at the stats, real GDP growth has hit 4.49%.
Which, for context, is the fastest pace of expansion in over a decade.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate. We've seen growth spurts before. Usually it just means the price of oil went up. Is this just another petrodollar illusion?
And that is the crucial question. But the answer, surprisingly, is no. That's the most critical shift in this whole assessment. We are finally seeing a structural move away from crude oil dependency.
So the growth isn't just from selling crude.
No, it's coming from refining it and from the non-oil sectors. The star of the show here is the Dangote refinery.
We've been hearing about this refinery for what feels like 20 years. It became almost this mythical creature.
You hear about it, but you never see it.
Exactly.
Well, the creature is alive and kicking. It's fully operational now in early 2026. And the impact is it's structural. Nigeria has become a net exporter of refined petroleum products.
Just think about the economics of that for a second. For decades, Nigeria, a major oil producer, was importing almost all its petrol.
It was an absurdity.
Buying back your own product at a premium.
Exactly. Now that switch is saving the country an estimated $20 billion a year in imports. That isn't just pocket change.
No.
That is a fundamental alteration of the balance of payments. It creates a foreign exchange buffer that just did not exist before.
So you keep the dollars in the country instead of sending them off to European refineries. That explains why the reserves are up.
It does. It's contributing to what they call monetary policy effectiveness. But we need to stop here and really dig into the inflation numbers.
I was hoping you would.
Because this is where you, as a listener, need to be very, very skeptical.
I saw the headline numbers from the National Bureau of Statistics. They claim inflation dropped from almost 35% down to 15.15% in December 2025. That sounds miraculous, maybe too miraculous.
It does sound too good to be true, doesn't it? And there is a controversy brewing. The drop is largely due to something called rebasing.
Rebasing.
The Bureau shifted the base year for the Consumer Price Index, the basket of goods they use to measure inflation, from 2009 to 2024.
Hang on. You're telling me inflation dropped by 20% just because they changed the math? That sounds like accounting magic, not actual economic relief. Are they just cooking the books?
It feels that way, and that's the cynicism many people feel. But there was a legitimate argument for it. Think about what you bought in 2009.
Right.
You might have been paying for landline telephone rentals, kerosene lamps, maybe DVDs.
Sure, I guess.
Nobody buys that stuff anymore. So the old index was tracking the price of irrelevant items. The new basket tracks data bundles, streaming subscriptions, fintech fees. So In that sense, it is a more accurate reflection of modern consumption.
Okay, that makes some sense. If the price of kerosene goes up but nobody uses it, it shouldn't spike the inflation rate. But then why is the IMF so furious about this? They're projecting inflation at 37% for 2026.
It's a massive gap.
That's a huge gap, 15% versus 37.
The conflict comes down to food. The IMF argues that the new modern basket underweights the cost of food.
Ah.
In a developing economy, the average person spends a huge chunk of their income, sometimes 60% or more, just on eating. So if the price of rice and yam is skyrocketing, but the price of a Netflix subscription is stable, the new index might say inflation is low.
But the person on the street says, I can't afford to eat.
That's the divergence. The IMF says the new numbers mask the pain of the poor.
So the macroeconomic indicators look fantastic to an investor in London, but the reality on the ground in Lagos might still be very expensive.
Precisely. However, regardless of that dispute, the market loves the news story. The Naira is trading under 1,400 to the dollar, and foreign exchange reserves have hit $47.02 billion. That's the highest since 2018. Money is flowing back in.
So the bold reforms, subsidy removal, FX liberalization, they are technically working even if people haven't felt the full relief yet. But an economy doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? It exists in a very messy world.
And 2026 is a particularly messy year for geopolitics.
This brings us to Section 2. The document uses this phrase, transactional multipolarity. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It's basically a strategy of playing the field.
Like modern dating. Nigeria isn't getting married, it's just swiping right on whoever has the best deal.
That's arguably the best way to describe it, yeah. Nigeria is trying to balance major powers without getting locked into an alliance with one side. It's about survival. And the biggest challenge right now is the United States under the Trump 2.0 administration.
Yeah, let's unpack this, because the America First policy seems to be hitting Nigeria pretty hard. It feels less like a partnership and more like, I don't know, punishment.
It's certainly transactional. The relationship has been completely recalibrated. It's no longer about aid or capacity building.
Right.
It's about trade, and tough trade. Under the new administration, tariffs on Nigerian exports have gone up from 10% to 14%.
Which just eats into the profit margins. And I saw there's a threat to AGUA. That's the duty-free deal, right?
The African Growth and Opportunity Act, yes. Its future is, let's say, uncertain. But it gets more specific. President Trump's drill baby drill policy has pushed global oil supply up, driving prices below $60 a barrel.
Which hurts Nigeria's revenue, even with the new refinery. If the raw material is worth less, the whole country makes less.
Exactly. But the tension isn't just economic, it's about sovereignty. We have to talk about the airstrikes.
Right, the Christmas Day airstrikes in 2025 in Sokono.
The U.S. conducted airstrikes against ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province, on Nigerian soil. Officially, the government said this was support, but domestically, it sparked massive anger.
Because it just looks like the U.S. decided to bomb something inside Nigeria's borders without asking for permission first.
It raises that question: who controls the airspace? When a foreign superpower conducts unilateral military action in your territory, are you really sovereign? It creates a very tense dynamic.
Okay, now contrast that with China.
It's the 55th anniversary of Nigeria-China relations this month, and the vibe seems completely different.
Very different. While the U.S. is tightening borders, we haven't even mentioned the visa restrictions. China is cutting ribbons. The Lekki Deep Sea Port, Chinese-funded, is a huge success story. 520,000 TEU throughput in 2025.
Wow.
It's acting as a transshipment hub for the whole region. And the source says China is pivoting its strategy, right?
That's the key shift. They're moving away from massive lending.
The debt trap criticism.
Exactly. Towards commercially viable investments. They are taking equity. They're putting money into the digital economy, 5G, green energy. Bilateral trade jumped 30.2% to over $22.3 billion.
So you have the U.S. bringing security pressure and tariffs, and you have China bringing infrastructure and trade deals. I mean, it seems like an easy choice for Nigeria, doesn't it?
You'd think so, but Nigeria can't afford to alienate the West. It needs Western security intelligence, banking access, so the government is stuck in the middle, trying to use Chinese money to build the economy while managing U.S. security expectations. A very difficult dance.
And speaking of security, we have to pivot to the heavy stuff. Section 3, the internal threat. Because all this economic growth, it feels very fragile when you look at the security situation.
It is the existential challenge. The document is very clear on this. You cannot have a 2030 vision if you don't have a secure state.
If you can't move goods from a factory to a market without paying a ransom, you don't have an economy.
Exactly. And the numbers are staggering. The ACLE data cites just under 53,000 deaths from political violence since 2009. That is a war zone.
A tragic toll. And it's important to be precise about who is suffering because this is where the U.S. and Nigeria really clash.
Right.
The UN humanitarian official quoted makes a crucial point. The victims are both Muslim and Christian. The vast majority of those 40,000 killed in the Northeast insurgency were Muslims.
Right. But the document also highlights a specific targeted violence in the Middle Belt.
Yes, in states like Benue, Plateau, and Kaduna, there is documented specific targeting of Christian communities, and this has led to a major diplomatic rift.
The CPC designation.
Exactly. In October 2025, the U.S. redesignated Nigeria as a country of particular concern for religious freedom.
Which basically puts Nigeria on a naughty list with rogue states. And President Tinubu didn't take that well.
No, he denies religious persecution is state policy. The government says this is complex banditry, it's a fight over water and land.
But the U.S. lawmakers look at the data in cases like Rhoda Jatau imprisoned for blasphemy, and they say, no, this is religious persecution.
And while the politicians argue, the human cost just keeps rising. We're talking 3.5 million internally displaced persons.
Nearly 10% of all displacement in Africa is happening inside Nigeria. And this connects back to the economy in a way that I think explains the paradox we started with.
You mean the Japa phenomenon?
Yes. Japa, to flee, to run away.
Yeah.
It used to be about economic migration, people leaving for better pay. But now it's driven by security.
So wait, we just talked about a booming economy, a new refinery, 4% growth, yet the brain drain is getting worse.
Because money doesn't buy safety. You could have a high-paying tech job in Lagos, but if you can't travel to Abuja by road without fear of kidnapping, the GDP growth is irrelevant to your quality of life.
Right.
Educated professionals, doctors, engineers are leaving because they don't feel safe raising their children there.
That is the disconnect. The economy is growing, but the human capital needed to sustain it is walking out the door at the airport.
Which brings us to the future. The so what of this whole deep dive. The assessment uses these Bayesian learning models to predict where Nigeria goes from here.
Okay, Bayesian learning sounds like something from a sci-fi movie. What does that actually mean?
It's actually quite practical. It just means they're constantly updating their probabilities based on new data. They're calculating odds based on current trends.
Yeah.
And they have 3 specific scenarios for the period between now, 2026, and 2031.
Okay, let's walk through them. Scenario 1, the grand consolidation. They give this a 65% probability. It's pretty high. This is the most likely outcome.
It is. And it's the optimistic path. But what does that actually feel like? If this plays out, policy discipline holds. The government doesn't panic. Inflation drops to single digits 7 to 9% by 2030.
Okay, so if I'm a young entrepreneur in Kano in 2030, what does the grand consolidation look like for me?
It means you're not just selling to your local market.
Yeah.
Because of the AfCFTA, the African Free Trade Area, you're shipping textiles to Kenya and Ghana tariff-free. It means the power stays on. It's a world where the Nigerian dream is actually lived in Nigeria, not in Houston.
And the Japa trend.
It reverses.
Yeah.
Jobs return. The tech sector in Lagos booms and actually retains its talent. Nigeria becomes the manufacturing engine of West Africa.
That sounds like the country everyone has been waiting for, but there's a 35% chance things go wrong.
Duh.
Let's look at scenario 2, reform fatigue, 25% probability.
This is the muddy middle scenario. It's essentially Groundhog Day.
How so?
Politics gets in the way. Maybe the 2027 election approaches, the government gets nervous. So they bring back the fuel subsidies to make people happy in the short term.
And that undoes all the fiscal progress we just talked about.
Instantly.
Yeah.
That $20 billion savings evaporates. You get a lost decade. Growth stagnates at 2 or 3%, which is just keeping up with population growth. Inflation stays high, around 18–25%.
And the best minds.
They leave permanently. In this scenario, the diaspora becomes permanent. The country just treads water.
That sounds depressing, but scenario 3 is the nightmare. The sectarian fracture, 10% probability.
This is where the security situation we talked about spins completely out of control. The farmer-herder conflict escalates into full-scale ethnic cleansing.
What does that do to the country?
It breaks the food supply. Food production drops by 40–50% because people simply cannot go to their farms. Defense spending eats the entire budget, so there's no money for schools or roads.
And the sovereignty issue comes back.
Yes. In this scenario, the crisis is so bad, you might see international intervention boots on the ground from other powers to secure oil fields or protect civilians. That would fundamentally compromise Nigeria as a sovereign state.
It's terrifying that even a 10% chance of that exists. That's a 1 in 10 roll of the dice for total collapse.
It is. But that's why this document is a call to action. It's saying, look, the 65% scenario is right there. You just have to hold the line.
So as we wrap up, what are the strategic imperatives? If Nigeria wants to hit that 65% jackpot, what does it have to do?
It's a three-part recipe. First, maintain fiscal discipline. No matter how painful, do not bring back the subsidies.
Second,
Navigate that great power competition. Take the Chinese infrastructure and the U.S. trade, but don't become a vassal to either. Keep your sovereignty intact.
and third.
Solve the security crisis.
Yeah.
This is the non-negotiable one. You cannot have a thriving economy if, as that UN official said, an entire generation has grown up in displacement camps.
That is the line that stuck with me. You can save $20 billion on oil, have a shiny new port, but if millions of your citizens are living in camps knowing nothing but war, what have you really built?
That is the tension. The economic numbers are flashing green, but they are fragile. The next 36 months from now to 2029 are the window of decisive action. If they get it right, Nigeria becomes a global powerhouse. If they get it wrong, well, the downside is steep.
It's a race between economic modernization and social fracture. And for the sake of the continent, you have to hope modernization wins.
As do I.
That's all for this deep dive into Nigeria's inflection point. We've thrown a lot at you, but the story is really about people, their safety, their money, and their future. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.